But now that extraordinary rant by the Libyan leader this afternoon has left many around the world shocked, and it's likely to have been of particular concern to those who've supported the regime of Muammar Gaddafi over the past few years. Well, let's remind ourselves of what he had to say this afternoon about his fellow Libyans earlier on.
All of those crimes are punishable by death. All those who attack the airports, the ports, all of them must be condemned to death.
Well, it's hard to believe that the very same man pictured there was here in Paris on a state visit just 4 years ago. The trip resulted in trade deals worth €10 billion for France, the fruits of a rapprochement which began back in 2003 when Jacques Chirac visited Tripoli right after the UN lifted sanctions against the regime. But is France paying the price now? More than the revolutions in Tunisia and in Egypt, the bloodbath in Libya has left France looking wrong-footed and out of touch in its approach to the region. Well, joining me tonight to discuss in Algiers, I'm joined by Amel Boubekeur. She's a research fellow at the École Nationale Supérieure here in Paris. Charles Cogan is the former CIA bureau chief in Paris and now professor at Harvard University. He's joining us on the line from Cambridge, Massachusetts. Here in the studio, meanwhile, George Kazolius is a senior producer at AITV and RFO. And Melissa Bell is France 24's international affairs editor. Good evening to you all. Thanks for being with us tonight. Charles, I'd like to start with you, if I may. We've heard from the German Chancellor Angela Merkel, we've heard from the British Prime Minister, we've heard from the White House, but President Sarkozy has been uncharacteristically quiet on events unfolding in Libya. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think President Sarkozy is very aware of what's going on. He doesn't, although he may appear to be impulsive, he chooses his moments carefully. My own opinion is I don't think France or the United States on this issue of the Arab Street has been all that wrong-footed. My formula for this is this too shall pass. France has a lot of implantation, particularly in the Maghreb, also in Egypt and Libya, and its influence is not going to go away.
George Kazolius, I know you're going to have a view on that. Is France looking wrong-footed in its approach to the region?
Well, Mr. Cogan's approach comes from the idea that maybe the people who are in power will be replaced by people like them. And I think that's kind of far-fetched, given what's happening in the Maghreb today. If you look at Egypt or Tunisia, you can see there's a real desire for something completely new and completely fresh. On the one hand, all the mistakes that France has made in North Africa, and they're going to pay for them. They're going to pay for them now. Cannot be attributed just to Sarkozy. But we can say that Sarkozy missed an excellent opportunity to change things. To change things when he said he was going to do away with the France-Afrique, to change things when the economic crisis came along and there was the whole thing about globalization and the dictate of big money. He missed a lot of opportunities to change things. In fact, he just continued what existed before. And so there will be a lot of, not in Egypt and Libya where France plays a much smaller role. But as things spread, France, Tunisia was a good example. Algeria and Morocco will be no different. And if it gets to Mauritania, then you'll see some of the same.
Now, Melissa, France has been caught off guard, hasn't it? Even Sarkozy's hand-picked ambassador to Tunisia, Boris Wallon, who was on the channel actually earlier this week, he said we shouldn't be so quick to judge Muammar Gaddafi. Everybody can make mistakes. I mean, these are the kind of comments that Sarkozy surely is cringing about now.
He is cringing about them, and what it has exposed, if you look just within France for a moment, is this great rift between the Élysée Palace and the diplomatic corps. In fact, a group of diplomats have written a piece today in today's Monde criticising Sarkozy's missed opportunity on the Arab Spring. And there has been this sense of it's an uncharacteristic of them really to come out of their silence. But there has been this worry within France that the Quai d'Orsay, the Foreign Affairs Ministry, was being rather sidelined by Sarkozy and those who are around him. And this has given them the opportunity to say that once again he is blaming the diplomatic corps for blunders that are in fact his own, and his own failure really to do with this what he might have. Now that is particularly regrettable inevitable, they say, because actually France has a strong tradition of speaking to the Arab world. We saw it with Chirac. And if there was one rupture that Nicolas Sarkozy succeeded in achieving, perhaps it was the wrong one, because he ceased to speak in language that they understood to the Arabic world and rather left it aside. And that is what they regret. So within France, there is that. And of course, all made all the worse by the episodes of Michel Alliot-Marie taking holidays in Tunisia just before the fall of Ben Ali, and Monsieur Fillon, of course, taking his holiday in Egypt just before the fall of Mubarak. But these are sort of tabloid episodes that have worsened the way the government seems to have handled this whole episode.
Amel Boubekeur in Algiers.
Can I make a point here?
Yeah, come in, Charles.
Yes, I think the one country that has gone totally wrong-footed in the region is the United States, with this veto of a resolution against settlements. And France, Britain, and Germany put up a solid front. Britain was the main spokesman, and they upheld the resolution. I think as far as what the previous speaker referred to in terms of these visits by Alliot-Marie and her offer of savoir-faire and Fillon's trip, these kind of trips would be absolutely verboten in the United States, at least in recent years. On top of that, our Puritan culture, this could never happen here.
I agree completely.
But I don't think it's a grave problem.
No, I agree completely on both points.
Problem.
Yeah. Let's just get the view from that part of the world. And Amel Boubekeur is in Algiers tonight. Amel, what's the thought where you are? I mean, in Algeria, of course, we've had a few protests so far. The revolution not quite getting off the ground as it has in some of the other countries in the region. But are people in Algeria, do they want France to stand up for them more? Are they kind of disappointed by the reaction from Paris?
Well, it's not just about being disappointed now. It's not just about having France mishandling the regional revolutions. It's about a total depolitization of French foreign policy in the region. What I mean by depolitization is that you have now, and this has been the case for almost 5 years, let's say, depolitization of any capabilities of France to offer any way out for what is going on, and on the other hand, trying to negotiate contracts. You mentioned Michel Alliot-Marie, who were in Tunisia during the uprisings, but Rafah is currently in Algiers, where and when you have a lot of students who are suffering from repression in the streets of Algiers currently, Rafah is here to negotiate economic contracts. So this depolitization of French foreign policy, especially in the Maghreb, is going to be very costly to France. And I would say that the call and the writings of the diplomats today yesterday in Le Monde, denunciating the fact that we have a kind of diplomacy without diplomats going on in the region, is really the sign of this depolitization of French foreign policy. And it's even more obvious in front of a new generation that is rejecting France and any other kind of foreign actors' intervention in current national affairs very, very violently.
It doesn't look good, does it, Melissa? I mean, even the usually gaffe-proof Prime Minister, François Fillon, was called out having his holidays paid for in Egypt by the government there, and then, of course, Mubarak. It just seems one thing after another. And there seems to be this tradition in France, this culture in France, that it's okay to do that. As Charles was saying, that wouldn't happen in the US.
It wouldn't, and I think that it has exposed that profound problem. But in a sense, that isn't the most important one. The more profound problem is not so much the way France and other Western countries have handled or mishandled what's happened over the last few weeks. It's the fact that suddenly images of Tony Blair, of Mr. Berlusconi, of Nicolas Sarkozy meeting with Colonel Gaddafi over the last few years, we see in a totally different light. So there is the way that Western governments have handled the uprisings and failed to speak to the needs of the people in Tahrir Square and elsewhere, and in a sense that this callous realpolitik where as long as they were friends, as long as they contained what we considered instability in the region, as long as they provided lucrative contracts for our companies and our businesses, then in a sense we were prepared to forgive any wrongs. We were prepared to ignore any grievances of the people, and I think that is the more profound malaise within Europe. Europe about the way our governments have handled it.
Well, there were actually some fresh WikiLeaks cables published today, actually, of when Sarkozy's diplomats had visited the region, and concerns about human rights just were not raised. They weren't an issue for many, many years, and now France is going to have to pay for that.
Well, of course they weren't an issue because
Can I say something about the situation in Algeria?
Well,
go ahead, Charles, just quickly.
Yes, I think the view of American diplomats who've been in Algeria is that the French tended to concentrate their contacts among the older officers and functionaries and those who were French speakers, rather than reaching out to the Islamists and they also maintained contacts with Berber elements, but they didn't reach out to the Islamists or the youth. That's number one. Number two, the Algerian regime has had experience with suppressing revolt, and I do not see the possibility of an overthrow of the government in Algiers. Third point on Morocco, I think the situation there is somewhat shielded by the fact that the dynasty has been in existence since 1666. The ruler claims descent from the Prophet, and there's a certain aura around the monarchy which prevents, I think, a total explosion in that country.
Yeah, I think Mr. Kogan raises an interesting point, is that these countries have to be taken individually. They're not the same. Now, Algeria is a very interesting point in question, given that the relationship with France for the natural gas that's in Algeria, that the French need Algerian resources, that the French have a long incestuous relationship with Algeria, and that there are millions of people of Algerian descent in France who still identify with Algeria, and the fact that, if Algeria does go over, the whole worry of massive illegal immigration. I mean, Algeria is a very special problem, to France, much more than Egypt or smaller Tunisia, which is a former French colony, not Egypt, of course. So Algeria is a very special point in question. Also, let's not forget how France backed the coup d'etat of Bouteflika after the Islamists won the elections back in 1989. But I don't think the FIS is the force it was then. But what Giscard d'Estaing said at the time, the former French president, was that you don't organize elections if you're not going to accept the wrong people win. And I think a lot of people hold that against France as well. One thing that these revolts have made clear, wherever they've come up, is that the Islamists are not the threat that France and the United States and everybody else has been telling us they are. Also, these people, what they want is what the United States and France and all others could have worked for so much sooner. They want jobs. They want their economies to grow. They want to lead happy lives. They don't want to live in misery.
Amel.
Yeah, if I can comment on that. I mean, we should not be misled by this kind of bipolarization between state elite on one hand and Islamists on the other hand, who should be supposed to be representative of the man of the street. There's a new political culture going on, and not just solely in Algeria, in the whole Arab world, in Egypt, that France is not getting. For example, the general feeling is that denouncing the repression is not enough. France and all foreign actors interested in the region should be much more active than that, should support civil societies in sending money, but just not only, also in intervening directly, in staying there. For example, in Tunisia, we have heard a lot of Tunisians asking for U.S. companies, other kind of foreign actors to stay there in the country and show solidarity. So I think there's a general feeling in the South that there's a need for a new foreign policy which equals to the new political culture that is going on, this post-revolutionary culture. And people are not just asking for denunciating these strong men who are just repressing their people. They are just asking for much more than that.
Right, and we are seeing a real shift, aren't we? Because France did build up a lot of goodwill in the Arab world by not supporting the Iraq war. We seem to be moving on from that, Charles, into a new era. Is there a risk that France might now be the go-to bad guy in the region rather than the United States, which has been for many years?
Chirac and Sarkozy are two different people.
Well,
I think that this is an exaggerated view of France being a problem. One thing, of course, has happened since the Iraq War is that this spectacular rapprochement between Mr. Sarkozy and the American public, which is, I don't think that is necessarily going to harm Sarkozy in the Arab world. I'd like to make an observation about this whole issue of the rich and the poor and how globalization has brought forth these images of extreme wealth, you know, Mercedes careening through Cairo where most of the people are terribly poor, the WikiLeaks leak about the Trabelsi family in Tunisia organizing a party way over the top at Hammamet with a caged tiger there, and just extraordinary displays of wealth. I think this is now put on display instantaneously, and the people are rising up against it. Even in Jordan, the wife of the king, the point is this wealth,
these extraordinary displays of wealth have been taken advantage of by governments in the West, allegedly by some ministers within the French government. That's surely going to have some serious ramifications. Bridges need to be built, Melissa.
Bridges need to be built, and I think there was a lot of disappointment from people like the protesters in Tahrir Square about the failure of Western governments to speak to what were, after all, ideals that they believed them to represent.
Right, you were in Egypt, we should point out.
And many people spoke about that and were quite cross that not more had been said. And I think that there is this sort of disconnect, really, between what the words that came out of the mouths of our leaders and what the people on the ground wanted to hear. And I think that also what the last few weeks has betrayed is an awful lot of prejudices, actually, about the Arab world, as though, and we've seen it in a number of respects, the media exaggerating, as you alluded to a moment ago, the threat of Islamist parties, the idea that actually it was very hard at first to see these demonstrations for what they were, which were ordinary people responding to the obvious inequalities that had become more and more apparent in their society, and the dictatorships under which they lived. And it took us all a long time to see it for what it was.
On the other hand, I have to come back to what Mr. Kogan said a little while ago. If you want to encourage Islamists in the Middle East, you veto a bill in the United Nations that condemns illegal Israeli settlements, like the United States did. There's nothing better than to slap the democratic wave movement in the Arab world than to do something like that. It was a golden opportunity for the United States to recognize at last that there has to be fair play in the Middle East for everybody. We've got a democratic movement. We're going to stand with you, and we're not going to tolerate anything illegal. And the United States did quite the opposite. Fortunately, as Mr. Kogan pointed out, France and Germany argued strongly in favor of this resolution. It was the time to stand with the Arab people.
Okay, all right, on that note, we're going to leave it there for now.
We're
going to have a quick break now, Charles. We'll be back with you in just a minute. Do stay with us. When we come back, we'll have the news and the second parts of the debate. Don't go away.